taxpayers at all.
So your ideal would be to pay for as much of it, I guess, as you're legally allowed to pay?
Yes.
Okay.
You mean required, not allowed?
Legally required, legally allowed?
Well, there's
There is a difference, but legally allowed, if you're allowed to pay for an extra sewer line, that maybe you're not legally
I
required.
would hope that Alliant and Mid-American and the city of Cedar Rapids would love us as a customer, because we will be one of the bigger utility customers in the county.
Okay.
A couple of things were mentioned, Tama and Wolf Riverside, and I'm just curious, what economic development popped up around those two casinos? Out front of Meskwaki, there's the Meskwaki Trading Post, a couple of gas pumps. There's a BP station in front of the Riverside Casino. It went from 2 gas pumps to 4 or 6, I believe, once the casino went in, and nothing else. TIF was mentioned. I think that's great that you don't plan to see TIF financing. I would prefer to see it in writing. Things come up later that you don't plan on.
Well, to your first point, are Riverside and Tama, are those in different boats in that they're kind of much more rural than, say, a Cedar Rapids or a Waterloo or a Dubuque even would be? Is that a factor in why some of that doesn't happen? Casinos, like Riverside has the golf course there, the hotel.
Well, I've been hearing from these gentlemen that they spur economic development and that mom and pop stores will pop up around them spontaneously, and that casinos evidently aren't meant to keep people in and not to go across the street and frequently.
Casino would be designed differently than, say, a Riverside, which is a destination. And stop me if I'm misspeaking, but that Riverside was kind of a destination that it's in and of itself, whereas a Cedar Rapids casino would be amongst other things. So that, I think that's where that comes from. So does that factor in?
Actually, destination casinos, and I don't think there is a destination casino by definition in Cedar Rapids in Iowa, but the destination casino would be those like on the Gulf of Mexico, New Orleans, Atlantic City, and Las Vegas. I mean,
but at least concept-wise.
Right, but if you're actually using the term destination casino, that is a term of art, so to speak. And there is not a destination casino. The closest you would have would be the ones on the Mississippi where you get, pulling people from the other states, but even that would not be a destination casino. But the economic studies that have been done, including, say, by the state of Iowa in 2005, show actually that casinos hold businesses that 30% of gambling expenditures incurred by local casinos are what they call displaced expenditures. And what that means is, 70% isn't, which is good, okay? So 70% of the money spent at a casino would not have been spent somewhere else. But 30% of the money spent in the casino would have been spent somewhere else, whether that would be Hy-Vee, the Irish Democrat, White Star, wherever, a clothing store. So the idea that when you have 30% of the income, and this is coming, it's from Socioeconomic Impact of Gambling on Iowa, final report, prepared for the Iowa Legislative Council. It was prepared by the University of Northern Iowa in June 2005. So if you have, and this was a very extensive study. It's hundreds of pages. I only have parts of the study with me. But if you have 30% is displaced expenditures, the idea that you're going to have more businesses pop up as opposed to businesses laying people off and actually closing makes no sense, and it is not consistent with other Iowa casinos. That's not to say that there aren't benefits to a casino nearby. It's not. It would make Cedar Rapids quite unique, and I believe we're unique, but not in that sense.
Real quick.
The chair of the Iowa Racing and Gaming Commission, Jeff Lamberti, has stated that in addition to that, we're at the saturation point for gambling or casinos.
And I was just about to get that, yeah.
He said that, but if there's going to be more, they would look more toward destination casinos with amenities like spas, hotels that are more resort-oriented than building new facilities. And it's hard to tell exactly what we're talking about here, but I'm kind of getting the sense that they're starting it wouldn't necessarily in the convention center. Okay, we're already planning to do.
You call the balls in the air, and let me do my best to address each of those. First of all, that's not what Chairman Lamberti said. What was said after the last casino was approved in 2010, the last official statement, policy statement by the Iowa Racing and Gaming Commission is that they weren't going to consider any new applications for 3 to 5 years. That's what the commission is on record to say.
Among other things.
Okay? That's their last official policy statement. Chairman Lamberti has only been chairman about a year. So that was made by the previous Racing and Gaming Commissioner, Chairman Craig Seibert. So let's make sure the record is correct on the last official policy statement that the commission made. Secondly, we can argue about whether it's a destination this or that or blah, blah, blah. But I think the most appropriate comparisons are probably if you look at what's happened in Peoria, what's happened in Council Bluffs, what's happened in Dubuque, what's happened to Prairie Meadows. The areas that are more closely connected to a metropolitan area than they are a rural area. And if you look at each of those areas, based on, I'll use the word that Sarah used earlier, empirical data, there is no empirical data that suggests there have been more business closings than openings in the surrounding markets. In fact, there have been more openings. We hired Dr. Harvey Siegelman, who was the longest-serving state economist in the history of Iowa, served some 20-odd years with Strategic Economics Group, to look at the sales tax impact in markets like ours that have and don't have casinos. And the result was nothing but positive. So I'm struggling to see any current studies, not one that's 8 years old, but a current study that disputes that. And when one goes to any of these surrounding markets and looks, you can see it. And I think we saw on Channel 2 and Fox the other night the interview with the woman that owns the chocolate shop in Dubuque, and are talking about it. And the last thing I'll say is to reemphasize what Drew said. If these things are really that bad, if they're really that bad, why did 350,000 people vote to keep them and only 100,000 people vote to oppose them in the most recent series of elections? I mean, that suggests to me that not everybody's stupid. I mean, there are a lot of people that recognize the benefits.
And now you have your own studies here that kind of looked into some of the economic side of this, of where these investors are coming from and where these visitors are coming from. And I believe I've got the numbers correct here. 18 million of your 80 million you were saying was going to be coming from other casinos. Is that correct? So if the rest of that money is not coming from other casinos, where are those customers coming from? Are these new customers that you think
They are coming from existing customers that don't game. They are coming from tourists who come here now that don't game, that might stay here and game, and it's coming from increased tourism. But there's an appropriate follow-up question to that. If you follow the strict logic of, if you do this, it's going to be $1 that somebody could spend elsewhere, so they're not going to spend it elsewhere. If you think about that logically for a second, that would suggest that we never want another movie theater, restaurant, bar, or any other source of entertainment in Cedar Rapids, because that's going to cannibalize revenue from the existing operations. I don't think any of us want that.
And I saw you guys very quickly say no to that.
First of all, as far as the elections, if you look at it, and I did go and I went on the Secretary of State's website, and it is true, their numbers as far as Black Hawk County. First of all, there was only one county, or actually there were several, but one county that didn't approve a casino that was listed, and there were others that they approved having a casino and they're never going to get one.
And some of those lower ones were ones that were new.
Right.
Those
But
were
the thing
renewals.
is, and I have the data here. What I did though is I went and I looked. Well, how many people didn't even bother to vote? Over 10,000. People didn't vote. 16.5% of the people who voted for governor in 2010 in Polk County did vote on the casino issue. First of all, Prairie Meadows, because of the nature of that debacle, and those of us who've been here long enough remember there was a state partnership, and the horse racing thing died, and we have been, as taxpayers, supporting that thing. I'm glad if it's finally making money. That's wonderful, because I'm tired of having my tax money go to Polk County for that casino. But once you already have a casino, the likelihood that you're going to say, okay, I'm going to move to shut it down is pretty slim. And that makes a vote on a casino all the more important. So the fact that most people who already have a casino in their county aren't going to say, okay, let's close this down and have this empty shell that's not going to be used for anything else in our community. That's just not realistic. So, yes, of course, most places do approve it, and if you look, you've got some, 11% in Wapello County didn't vote, 11% in Jackson County didn't vote on this issue, but they voted for governor. So, it's kind of a non-issue, the fact that once you have a casino, a lot of people support it. And there's a difference between a movie theater. I don't think anyone would say, oh, let's not have Paramount Theater because it conflicts with Theater Cedar Rapids. Gambling dollars, when you lose, and let's face it, most people lose. That's why most casinos, if you've ever been to Vegas, are really nice looking. Because over time, the house wins. And that's, that's just a fact. I mean, my dad used to tell me that the lotto is a tax on people dumb in math. And, a casino is a tax on people who, I guess, have a lot of hope. But there's a difference between money spent in a casino and somebody who buys a new dress. They have something to show for it. But the idea that you don't want any discretionary money used, or you don't want any new businesses, to a certain extent you have growth in your community and you can afford to have more businesses.
Now, this is one that's come up a couple times and is a really popular one amongst some of the questions. And thank you, everybody, for all these cards. Is kind of the so-called ills of gambling, and you kind of hit on it a couple times, Sarah. Just talk real briefly, and I'd look for a response from you guys as to what are some of the impacts that you see in some of the studies. You referenced a couple of them, as to what kind of impacts there are, what extent of those impacts are.
Sure. And first of all, there's two different kinds of studies. There are those studies that are funded by either governmental research or university research that have no gambling money, and those funded by the gaming industry. And I'm not casting aspersions on the people who want to be part of the gaming industry, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that any study that you pay for is going to be more likely to support your position. But there's studies that show, two professors out of Creighton who've done studies on the effects of bankruptcy in casino counties in Iowa versus non-casino counties. And over a 12-year period, the bankruptcy rates grew by 180% in the casino counties, and they grew by 117% in the non-casino counties. Pathological gamblers generate 15% of industry's gross revenue. A pathological gambler is considered the highest form of somebody who has a problem. There are problem gamblers and then pathological gamblers. And 2 weeks ago, I didn't know about these terms. We used to call them people who are compulsive gamblers. Apparently, that term isn't used anymore. But the bankruptcy rate is anywhere from a small 2.3% higher in a county that has a casino. And, there are people who, like I said, and I have a copy, and I redacted the name of the client who lost money, but there are people who will be hurt by a casino who never go into a casino. When we had the touch play, and it was so successful, like I started to say at the opening thing, the Iowa Lottery Commission thought that there would be $17 million in revenue in fiscal 2006. They, even though it went 10 months before it was banned by the legislature, the touch play, they generated $121.5 million. Why? Because the availability of gambling. When you have more availability, you have people who will gamble more. And in, I believe his name is Wayne Ford. I have it in my notes. What's that? Yeah, I know he is. Wayne Ford. Anyway, he's a representative in Des Moines, Iowa. His House district had the highest number of touch play machines in any area in the state. They also had the highest number of revenue generated. And during the time we had touch play, they had the highest that organization. Let's see. The National Center for Responsible Gaming is the organization I was talking about, and they have studies. You read some of them, and it is just amazing what comes out of some of those studies. One study claims that there is never any loss with gambling because it's all a matter of transferring economic wealth so that when one guy loses 200, that's not a loss to the community because the gambling casino has won 200 and it's just a transfer of wealth. I mean, it's the most crazy article I've ever seen. So I was not casting aspersions on any research that I have not seen from Mr. Gray and his organization. When I'm talking about the gaming industry studies, I'm talking about the actual current gaming industry and not a group that has conducted any studies for their own viability of their community. My problem with a casino is the social cost. And we don't know, a lot of people, and I'm glad to hear today that there has been an admission that, yes, there are people, whether it's 2% or 10%, that will have a problem with gambling, and that is a social cost. And I'm glad that that was stated, because I've had people come up to me and say, oh, no, and they've all based it on Dr. Black's research article from November 2012, and that says, no, now people, that the more casinos you have, the more gambling opportunities you have, actually the less gambling you have, which of course makes no sense. And when you read his report, you kind of figure it doesn't make sense, and then when you actually do some research, you really realize why it doesn't make sense. So I'm glad that there has been an admission that, yes, there are people that are going to be hurt by this, and there hasn't been any dispute that, yes, bankruptcies will increase. To me, when I weigh the benefits, and there are benefits from gambling, that 3%, while I wish it was 5.7, it's better than nothing. But when I weigh the benefits, the extra jobs, versus the negatives, to me, and maybe it's because I'm a bleeding heart liberal, I don't think the social costs justify a casino.
All right. Drew?
So the 2.4 million that comes into the community for charities, that does some good for some people. You can't just look and say the negative is with the problem gamblers, and 2.4 million isn't going to improve anybody else's life. I think that does improve other people's lives and will help the community. I also think it makes a difference of 600 jobs. I don't think our state is out of the woods yet in this economy. We need the 600 jobs. I think it makes, as I said, the 2.4 million and the additional tax dollars. Our community, city government has needs, and they need additional dollars. And last you said, can we do better? We're not using TIF money. Currently, to recruit a company, a size of company that's going to put 80 million in and 2.4 million in charitable work, 600 jobs, they're going to request a lot of either TIF money or some upfront money to recruit them here. Recently, IBM and Google came to the state of Iowa. They didn't come to Cedar Rapids. They went to Dubuque and Council Bluffs. It's highly competitive, and we're not using TIF money that will allow the city or the state to use that TIF money to recruit somebody else into Cedar Rapids.
All right. And Steve?
Thank you. I agree with what Todd said. We appreciate you and Impact CR, all of you, for taking the time to listen to what I think is a very important dialogue. You know, when you think about the jobs, you know, a cost to society is 5% unemployment. Another cost to society is another 5% underemployment. And if we can provide opportunities for people to have meaningful jobs, that will help with the total cost burden of living in Cedar Rapids and in Linn County. So the jobs are incredibly important. Two, the economic benefit, and we can criticize the 2.4 or whether it should be 3, but the fact that it's going to be more than $40 million in charitable contributions, that's a meaningful contribution that we as taxpayers aren't going to have to make. And 3, there are millions of dollars that leave here every month, every year, and go and do that somewhere else. Why wouldn't we keep that money here to the benefit of Linn County? You know, we're not trying to hide anything. We're not trying to rush anything. One of my faults is sometimes I go too fast. We try to be as straightforward with our investor disclosures as we can be. We told you where 90% of the money is coming from. And you know what? They're good people. They are really good people, and it's hard to argue with the fact that they aren't good people. We've also said that 100% of our campaign is going to be financed by our investors. and that there are no elected, appointed officials, city or county, involved in either the campaign or our investor group. And then last but not least, the location thing, please understand it's complicated. It's tough to buy 10 acres based upon this happening and that happening, and maybe we'll close in 2 years. But we're working aggressively on that, and we plan to give a very substantive update on the progress that Brian and OPM have been making a week from today. So, in closing, we're doing the best that we can. We appreciate your vote, however you vote. And in closing, we're going to be okay without it. The question is, will we be better or not with it? And I think we'll be better with it.
That's a very good point. I think everyone on this panel has kind of said that Cedar Rapids is doing very well, and I think at the end of the day, there's nothing personal here. It's all a matter of opinion, and it's open to debate. And thank you all for listening to this debate. And really, thank you to all of our panelists for a very informative and sometimes heated but good discussion. And thanks again to KCRG. This certainly will not be the last opportunity. KCRG is going to be hosting a forum as well coming up Tuesday, February 26th. That's a week before the election, to try and get some more information out there. Because again, as both people up here said, the more information people can get out there, the more informed they're going to be, and hopefully have a smart election on March 5th. So thank you again, and have a good night, guys.